The parking structure smelled of wet concrete and exhaust, and the particular cold that lives inside buildings that have never once seen sunlight. Clara pressed her back against the pillar on level 3, her left hand clamped over her forearm where the man's knife had opened the skin, and counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. She had 11% battery on a phone that wasn't hers. The phone belonged to the man currently unconscious beside the white sedan in Bay 34. She had hit him with the fire extinguisher she'd grabbed off the stairwell wall. It had taken 2 swings. The first had been panic. The second had been cold, deliberate, and terrifyingly efficient, which told her something about herself she hadn't known before tonight. She had a deep cut on her forearm, a split lip, and a cracked molar that would need a root canal before the week was out. She did not have a car, she did not have her purse, she did not have her phone, her ID, or her shoes. She'd left them 2 levels below when she ran. What she had was 11% battery, a borrowed phone, and 1 number memorized so thoroughly she'd recited it like a prayer for 4 years. A number her dying father had sealed in an envelope and taped to the back of a false bottom in a fireproof safe. A number that belonged to a man her father had warned her, in his cramped engineer's handwriting, to call only when there was nothing else left. She typed the number. Her fingers were steady. That surprised her. The line rang twice. It picked up without a word, just listening, heavy, absolute silence on the other end, like the inside of a vault. Wraith. She said his name the way you say a word in a foreign language for the first time, careful, uncertain of the weight. A pause, then how bad? Not who is this, not how did you get this number, just how bad. Forearm, knife, not deep. She looked toward the stairwell, 1 man down, I don't know if there are more. She heard the distinct sound of a chair being pushed back. Where? She told him. The structure name, the level, the column number she was hiding behind. 14 minutes, he said. Don't move. Don't call anyone else. The line went dead. Clara slid down the pillar until she was sitting on bare concrete, barefoot, bleeding through her fingers, and understood with a clarity that felt almost chemical that calling Anton Wraith was the single most rational decision she had made in 4 years. She had been 25 when her father died, 26 when she found the envelope. Dominic Moss had been an accountant for most of Clara's childhood, or so she had believed. He'd kept regular hours, driven a sensible car, attended her school plays and her math competitions and her college graduation in a suit that had been dry cleaned for the occasion. He had worried about interest rates and whether she was eating enough protein, and had made her memorize the home address of every person he'd called a friend in case of emergency. It turned out he had kept very careful track of that distinction, friend versus employer. The people who paid him had never made either list. The envelope was behind the false bottom in the fireproof safe, beneath the life insurance policy that barely covered his funeral costs, and the deed to the house that her brother Beau had already signed over to cover gambling debts Clara hadn't known existed. Inside, a handwritten note and a card, no logo, no company name, 10 digits and 1 word, Wraith. There will come a moment, her father had written, when the normal world can't protect you, this man will. But Clara, only when there is nothing else left. He does not do favors, he does debts. Make sure you know what you're willing to owe. She had memorized the number the same night. She had put the card in her wallet. She had done everything in her power, for 4 consecutive years, to never need it. She had moved to Portland from the city that had taken her father. She'd taken a job as a bookkeeper at a community legal aid office. Not glamorous, not high-paying, but clean. Numbers had always been honest in the way people rarely were, and she was good with them the way some people are good at reading faces. Intuitively, completely, without having to learn how. The legal aid office had needed someone who could identify when a client's landlord was hiding rental income across 3 shell companies. She had been very good at that. She had built a life the size of a carefully sealed room, small, manageable, hers. Then Beau had called 8 days ago. He needed money. He always needed money. in the way of men who have never once connected the concept of money to the concept of labor. But this time the number he named had made her go very quiet, because it wasn't the kind of number you borrow from family. It was the kind of number that came with people attached to it. People who showed up, who sent reminders, who did not send paper statements. She had said no. She had said it calmly, professionally, the way she spoke to clients who came in with receipts they'd fabricated and hoped she wouldn't notice. She had hung up. And now she was sitting in a parking garage with someone else's blood drying on her sleeve and a phone at 11%, because no had not been the answer Beau's creditors were prepared to accept. The sound of the elevator opening at the 12-minute mark was so quiet she nearly missed it. What she didn't miss was the quality of the silence that followed. It was different from the empty silence of an abandoned parking structure. It was occupied, dense, the way a room changes when something very large and very still enters it and does not announce itself. Column 7. The voice was low, not raised. The voice of a man who had learned, at some point and for reasons that mattered, to fill space without making noise. She leaned around the pillar. He was tall, that was the first thing. Tall and built with the kind of density that comes from decades of purposeful physical existence rather than a gym. Dark overcoat, no tie, dark shirt beneath. He moved with the specific economy of someone who had long since stopped wasting motion. He had lines in his face that were not only age, or not just age, and a scar through his left eyebrow that had healed cleanly, which meant someone who knew what they were doing had stitched it. He was somewhere in his early 40s and looked like a man who had earned every single year. There were 2 men with him. She hadn't heard them enter either. Wraith stopped 3 feet from her. He assessed her arm, her face. He did not look at the man she'd put down with the fire extinguisher, which told her his people were already handling that somewhere she couldn't see. "Can you walk?" An assessment, not a question. Yes. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a folded cloth, actual linen. She realized as he held it out and said, "Pressure on the forearm. The lip will close on its own." She pressed the cloth against the cut. It was monogrammed. She decided not to think about that. "How did you get this number?" he said. "My father, he went by Dom." She watched his face, Dominic Moss. Something shifted. Not softness. Nothing as navigable as softness. More like the minute repositioning of tectonic plates beneath a still surface. "When did he pass?" Wraith said. 4 years ago. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her the way she looked at a balance sheet for the first time. Not with judgment, but with the specific attention of someone cataloging what's actually there. "You're Clara," he said. She blinked. "You knew him." "Your father was the finest forensic accountant I have ever employed." He said it without sentiment, the way you state a reliable column total. "He worked for me for 6 years. When he decided he was done, I let him go. He had earned it." A pause, precise and considered. "He told me he had a daughter who understood numbers the way most people understand breathing." Clara looked at this man, this cold, expensive, quietly terrifying man, and felt the specific vertigo of a world rearranging itself without asking permission. She had spent 4 years believing she had built her talent in isolation, built it from scratch, from necessity, from the math competitions and the double-checking and the refusal to let a single figure go unaccounted for. And her father had been practicing the same gift in the dark, for employers he'd never put on the friends list. "Okay," she said. Not to him. To herself. To the version of her history that had just admitted it was more complicated than she'd been told. "Okay." "The men who came tonight," Wraith said. "Who sent them?" She already knew. She had known from the moment the first man had stepped out from between the parked cars and said her brother's name before he said hers, like it was a credential. "Beau," she said, "my brother." Wraith's face did not change. "Come with me," he said. "I have a doctor who doesn't ask for identification." The building was a converted warehouse in the industrial quarter. Not the high-rise penthouse she might have imagined, but something more deliberate, more defensible. The elevator required a key and a code and a secondary code. The interior was concrete and dark wood and controlled light, functional and comfortable without ever softening into a space that could be mistaken for somewhere civilians lived. The doctor was a woman named Yuen. She was 50 and precise and had the manner of someone who had stopped being surprised by the human body's capacity for damage some time in the previous decade. She looked at Clara's arm, said 4 stitches and set to work without preamble. Clara sat in a hard chair and let her work. Wraith stood in the doorway for the entire examination. He did not look away. She was aware of him the way she was aware of weather, pervasively, unavoidably, as something that could not be ignored but did not require direct engagement. Yuen handed her ibuprofen and water and left without being dismissed, which meant Wraith had communicated that he wanted the room before he'd said anything out loud. "You should sleep," he said, same flat logic as everything else. Not a suggestion, not warmth, the most efficient next step stated plainly. "I need to understand what happened tonight." She looked at the bandage on her forearm. "I need to know what Bo actually owes, and to whom, and whether they'll send someone else tomorrow." A beat. "Can you read a financial disclosure?" "I've done forensic accounting at a legal aid office for 4 years. Give me a balance sheet in 30 minutes, and I can tell you where every dollar went, and who didn't want you to find it." Something moved in his eyes, not warmth, something more useful than warmth. "Sleep first," he said. "The information will be worse in the morning, but you'll be better equipped to carry it." He showed her to a room at the end of a corridor, clean sheets the color of slate, a glass of water, a folded shirt that was too large. She put it on and lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought, with a clarity she hadn't felt in 8 days, that she was in a safer place right now than she'd been in her apartment, her neighborhood, or her carefully constructed life since Bo's phone call. She was asleep in less than 5 minutes. Grey morning light came through a high window. Clara sat up, assessed the inventory, forearm tight but manageable, lip-swollen, molar a steady background ache, and went looking for Wraith. He was at a long table in a room that functioned as a study and an operations center simultaneously. 2 monitors, a stack of folders, a coffee that was clearly not his first of the day. Dark pullover, sleeves pushed up. The tattoos she'd glimpsed the night before were extensive and deliberate, the kind that tell a story if you know how to read the language. He looked up when she walked in. "Sit," he said. He pushed a folder toward the edge of the table. She sat. She opened it. She read for 6 minutes without speaking. The folder held a financial summary. 2 pages, clean formatting. Someone on Wraith's payroll who also understood structure. She passed it immediately, the way a musician hears the chord before the individual notes. Bo had borrowed $240,000 across 4 creditors over 18 months. That alone was not a surprise. The column on the right side was the surprise. It was an itemized list of the collateral Bo had offered when the cash ran out. She read down the column. She read it again. Her name appeared on the 3rd line. Not her savings, not her assets, her current address, her workplace, her Thursday evening schedule, her photograph sourced from a professional headshot on the legal aid office website. Everything Bo had compiled and handed over in exchange for a 6-week extension on a debt he had no intention of paying. He hadn't just failed to protect her, he had drawn the map. Clara set the folder down on the table. She was aware of a sensation in her chest, something contracting and cooling, like a window being sealed from the inside. "He built the route to the parking garage," she said. "Yes. He's been feeding them my movements. For at least 3 weeks, likely longer." She looked at the second folder he hadn't given her yet. "There's more." He slid it across the table. Inside was a financial summary she hadn't seen yet. A different set of accounts, different structure, a series of small irregular deposits into an account she did not immediately recognize. She looked at the routing. She looked at the originating entity. She looked at Wraith. "This is a Wolf account," she said. She'd heard the name in passing, in the margins of the first folder's notes. Wolf was paying Bo. For 8 months. Wraith's voice was perfectly level. Your brother was not just a debtor behind on his payments. He was an active information source for a man who has been moving his operations into this city's south quarter without invitation, without negotiation, and without consequence until now. Clara set the folder down. The room was very quiet. She thought about Bo at her kitchen table 2 Christmases ago, asking about her work, asking which clients were interesting, asking if she ever dealt with anything that came through the South Quarter docks. She had thought he was making conversation. She had been charmed, briefly, that he seemed curious about her life. She had been an idiot. She had been a civilian. Don't kill him, she said. Wraith looked at her. I mean it, she said. I know how this works. I know what the ledger says he's owed. I'm asking you not to kill him. And if I told you the ledger makes it necessary. I'd tell you I understand the ledger. I'd also tell you I'm not asking for his sake, she met his eyes directly. I'm asking for mine. I've spent 4 years making sure my accounts are clean. That's not nothing to me. You can break him, relocate him, make him yours in whatever way makes the books balance. But I don't want his death entered on my side of the ledger. I don't want to carry that. A long silence. Outside, the early morning moved over the industrial district. Somewhere below the window, a truck started. I'll break both hands, Wraith said finally. Not cruelty, accounting. He won't be able to pass documentation for 2 months. I'll absorb his debt, which means he will belong to me directly, which means Wolf loses his asset, and your brother spends the rest of the year being very, very careful about how he breathes. He paused. That is not mercy. But it's the version that keeps him living. Clara looked at the folder, at the column with her name in it. Okay, she said. Wraith looked at her for 1 beat longer than necessary. Then he picked up his phone. He left 40 minutes later with the man she'd heard called Pirro. She watched the car pull away from the window and stood there for a long time after the taillights disappeared. The building wasn't empty. There were men at every threshold. None of them spoke to her. None of them blocked her. They acknowledged her with the specific, careful neutrality of people who had been told something precise. Not she's a guest, but something closer to she is not to be impeded. She poured coffee and sat back down with the folders and spent 2 hours reconstructing the full financial architecture of her brother's arrangement with Wolf. Old habit. When the ground falls away, she found the numbers. Numbers had edges. Numbers did not change their story based on who was asking. She was still working when Wraith returned. He was unmarked. She had not been sure he would be. She had not been sure what, exactly, had happened at whatever location Pirro had found Bo, but he came in clean and quiet, and sat across from her without asking whether she'd eaten, which she found she appreciated. Wolf launders through a restaurant group, she said without looking up. 8 locations. The balance sheets look messy at first read. He wants them to look like normal variants in food service operations, which is high noise enough that most examiners give up. But the consolidation isn't genuine. It's constructed. She turned one of the pages toward him and tapped a figure. This is the load-bearing number. If you can document the origination on this line, the entire structure collapses backward. Wraith looked at the figure. He looked at her. Wolf called while you were working, he said. What did he want? What they always want when they're not sure of their position. He called it a business dispute. Said you represent collateral on a legitimate instrument. He slid a printed call transcript across the table. He used the word asset. Clara read the transcript twice. The second time she was looking for the architecture beneath the language, where the gaps were, where the confidence lived, where the bluster covered uncertainty. It was the same skill she used on falsified receipts. He thinks you'll cut me loose, she said. He thinks the cleanest resolution for you is to treat me as a complication you remove from your operation. He's not afraid of you. He's positioning this as something you can negotiate your way out of. She set the transcript down. He's wrong about the math. He is, Wraith said. Because this isn't about me. It hasn't been about you specifically since before last night. You are the occasion, not the cause. He said it plainly, without apology. I want you to understand what you are walking into here. I am going to move against Wolf's South Quarter operations. I am going to use the documentation you've identified as the mechanism. And while that happens, you will be in this building, under this roof, with the understanding that anyone who comes through that door for you is coming through me first. He paused. I don't extend that for sentiment. I extend it because you have value to this operation that I would be foolish to leave unprotected, and because your father gave me 6 years of work I have not found the equivalent of since. Another pause, shorter, and because Wolf put his hands on something he was not authorized to touch, and I collect on that kind of entry personally. Clara looked at this man across the table. She looked at the tattoos and the scar and the calm, absolute quality of his attention. She thought about her father in his sensible car and his dry-cleaned suit and his math competitions, hiding for 20 years the fact that he had moved in rooms exactly like this one, with men exactly like this one, and had been safe enough in them to raise a daughter who could read a balance sheet the way other people read faces. She thought about the parking garage, the 2 swings of the fire extinguisher, the way the second one had been different from the first. She thought about the column with her name on it, in her brother's handwriting, traded for 6 weeks of breathing room. The math was not complicated. She was good at math. Give me the full Wolf files, she said. Everything you have. Balance sheets, operating agreements, whatever your people pulled. She picked up her pen. I'll find you the load-bearing number in every structure he's built. You won't need to burn anything down. You'll just need to pull the right thread and let it unravel. Wraith looked at her for a moment that had a different quality from the ones before it. Not assessment, not calculation, but something she could not quite name. The thing a ledger does when the columns finally resolve. He opened the table's side drawer and set a thumb drive between them. Secondary office, he said. End of the hall. The system is already unlocked. He stood. I'll have food brought in. He was almost to the door when she said, Right. He stopped. My father. She kept her eyes on the table. The 6 years he worked for you. Was he? She searched for the word. She had a lot of words. This one was harder than the figures. Was he safe? Wraith turned and looked at her. He looked at her the way he seemed to look at everything, without flinching, without softening, without the polite deflections that people use when they don't want to answer truthfully. He was the safest person in every room I put him in, he said, because I don't waste what's valuable to me. He said it as a fact, not a comfort, and Dominic Moss was exceptional. He left. Clara sat for a moment with the thumb drive in her palm, rolling it between her fingers. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 days ago. The one who came in early on Thursday mornings to get ahead of the caseload, who kept lavender tea in her desk drawer, who had convinced herself with great diligence that a quiet and careful life was the same thing as a protected one. That woman had been wrong in the way that felt most humiliating, not through ignorance, but through the specific and chosen blindness of someone who very much wanted a particular thing to be true. The silence in a building like this was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a very large, very controlled force at rest. She had been living in the other kind of silence, the kind that just meant no one was watching. No one watching had never been the same thing as safe. It had only meant that the danger could walk in without announcing itself. She stood. She picked up the thumb drive and her coffee and went to find the secondary office. The balance sheets loaded in under a minute. She pulled the pen from behind her ear and began to work. The first through line revealed itself in 11 minutes. She circled it. She felt, unexpectedly, completely, the clean, specific satisfaction of a number that has been hiding and has finally confessed its position. She turned the page and kept going. Wolf had built something he believed was invisible. He had layered it and obscured it, and run it through 8 locations and 3 currencies and what appeared, on first read, to be genuine variance in ordinary operating costs. But a ledger, Clara knew, never lies, it only hides. And she had been trained by a man she was only now beginning to understand, to find exactly what was hidden. She worked. Outside the high window, the grey morning moved toward afternoon. Somewhere in the building, she could hear Wraith on the phone, low, unhurried, utterly without heat, which was somehow more precise and more dangerous than urgency would have been. The voice of a man who treated consequences not as things that happened to him, but as entries he controlled. Her father had worked for this man for 6 years. Her father had trusted this man enough to put his number in a sealed envelope and tape it to the false bottom of a fireproof safe, alongside the only advice he'd ever given her that didn't come with a footnote. Make sure you know what you're willing to owe. Clara looked at the 4 pages of notes she'd filled in the last 2 hours. She looked at the figure she'd circled, the load-bearing entry, the one that would bring the whole structure down if you pulled it correctly and documented the pull. She thought about the parking garage. She thought about the 2 swings. She knew what she was willing to owe. She turned back to the screen, picked up her pen, and did not look away.